talked a lot about how relationship is important when talking about these very important issues for the church and for society as a whole. And just so that we're all on the same page, can you talk a little about what those issues are, especially for young adults and young people in general?
Yeah. That's a big question. One of the things, kind of off the presentation that we did at annual conference, one of the ways that we used to focus kind of thinking about where those issues, particularly that young adults disconnect with faith community, was David Kinnaman's book, You Lost Me. And so when I got up there to represent the young adult who didn't speak about it because of the difficult issue, I was really talking about really two particular disconnections that David Kinnaman identifies, and those are around perceptions that the church is repressive in terms of sexuality, and that the church is exclusive, and that's not just sexuality, but includes homosexuality, other faiths, and those kind of things. And so the two issues that I sort of was trying to put into the forefront were these particular kind of disconnections that David Kinnaman talks about. And I think that from my understanding, both of kind of what I've read and my own kind of reading of the culture and young adults that I talk to, there are a couple ways in which these issues are really different for them. To some degree, on issues like homosexuality, like I said in the presentation, what you can see from just demographics and polls and studies is that young adults as a whole are just in a very different place on issues like gay marriage than previous generations, and the gap is really wide. And so the first is just sort of acknowledge that fact. And other issues of sort of like that idea of sort of the perception of the church as repressive in terms of sexuality or exclusive has to do also with sort of not necessarily always a change in sort of understanding or views, but a change in the way that that's acceptable to express or to talk about. So you'll find that young adults are much more comfortable being open about things that previous generations maybe thought you just didn't talk about. So I mean that's one of the ways that it's really different. I mean, I don't know, you probably, when you think about those different issues, you can probably think about some ways that you see that things have changed from, say, even 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I mean, you guys probably see those yourselves with young adults.
Yeah, just the way that, I mean, I'm a little bit younger than you, but
thank you.
Yes, you are. But that's still, I can see just the change that has happened just in my own adult life, from the time I entered college about 10 years or so ago, and the way the understanding of homosexuality, not only within the larger society but also the church, has changed. I mean, we think of things from mainline churches beginning the process of ordination of gay and lesbian people, and the conversations around acceptance and where they fit into the congregations as a whole. Those just weren't happening before then, or at least they weren't happening on the surface as far as I knew as a young person myself. So yeah, when you talk about how that has changed, it has changed very dramatically and very quickly in the church, and young adults and people who are a little bit younger than me, since I'm starting to butt up against the top end of that young adult thing now. But people who are younger than me have lived in that area where, in the midst of all that very difficult and very quick change, and that means that the church has had to react very quickly as well to that.
Yeah.
So what are some of the barriers that keep fruitful conversations about issues like these that young adults have had to deal with, as we keep saying, very quickly and very dramatically? What are some of the things that get in the way from having conversations about recognizing those big and powerful changes?
Yeah. I think part of it is the sense of, again, like in those conversations, I think these are things that people get, that we all can tend to get very sort of, what I want to say, like hooked into very easily and very quickly. These are things that provoke a very strong response from us emotionally, and on all sides of this kind of conversation. And so I think that one of the things that I see often is it's just sort of managing your own anxieties in the midst of these conversations is probably the biggest challenge. So being able to kind of remain non-anxious in the midst of a conversation about something that's very difficult to talk about, being able to like really try really hard to listen before you're ready for a rebuttal. I mean, these kind of basic things about how you have conversations on difficult topics apply in these situations, because very quickly defenses can come up, anxieties come up, and you kind of stop listening to each other. And I think that was one of the challenges in the Presentation Annual Conference, that what we felt, even the young adult who wanted to kind of present on this topic and kind of bring the issues from his perspective about this, was that we felt in the context of these conversations where so often we just talk past each other. And we use these issues as sort of litmus tests, right? So if you're at this one place, you're in or out, right? Like you're Christian or you're not Christian, you're Orthodox or not, you're compassionate or not, you're, on both sides we have these ways in which like whatever somebody else's stance on that becomes a judgment on their character immediately. And so to be able to engage in that conversation in a way that's non-anxious, that really tries to listen deeply, I think is the biggest challenge, so that we're not talking past each other, but really talking with each other. So, but I think it's hard. I mean, it's hard for me. It's, this is an area where that's very hard for me to do. So,
yeah. And I think another barrier, at least in my experience, is when you're having these difficult conversations, somebody is coming from a perspective of, I am standing up for someone, and the other person is coming, it feels sometimes like there's an attack coming. I'm here to represent and stand up for my friend, for my colleague, and how dare you come after them like that. And I think that's a very quick barrier to put up for some wanting to feel like they have to defend somebody, when necessarily that's not necessarily what's going on. It is, again, a talking past one another.
I keep hearing this talk about talking past each other. How do we get onto the same page when we're talking about these difficult issues? Any ideas?
I really think it's a lot of that is the keys. I mean, just active listening, being non-anxious, really trying to understand the other person these things are really important. And finding people who you can really have a conversation in that way with. There may be people that you just can't have that conversation in a real honest way with. We had after the Session Annual Conference, there was a man who came up to us who was at Annual Conference and said, "Could I just have some conversations with you? Talk about millennials and views on, particularly around homosexuality." And he said, I just feel like I haven't really had a space where I can talk about this with anybody. A man probably in his 50s, and he said, my daughter and I have tried to talk about this repeatedly, and we just end up yelling at each other, but I really feel like I really want to understand, and I really want to be able to share where I am, and I struggle to find a place where I can do that. And we had this really rich conversation. So I think it's really trying to figure out on all sides where you can figure out a place to have that conversation.
And I think a key to that is the ability to be vulnerable, because I think of the fruitful conversations that I've had around this topic, and it started as a family conversation with my brother, myself, and my dad. And because those were safe people for me, I could very clearly express, well, this is what I think, and this is what I've experienced. My brother and my dad could do the same thing. And where we weren't agreeing on everything, but we were able to say, okay, I hear what you're saying. I think you're wrong.
Right.
And I say that with respect and love. I think you're wrong.
Right.
But we can at least, as a family, say, let's continue to have this conversation. And we are the body of Christ. We are a family. This should be a place where we can sit down with one another and say, here's what I think. I think you're wrong, respectfully. And you please share with me why you think I'm wrong. And let's have a conversation about that. But I think that requires you to put yourself in a very vulnerable position to be willing to hear others' perspectives on your own opinion.
Right.
Right, and just that willingness and being able to see the other's point of view, not as something to just shoot down or dismiss or to just get rid of, but to recognize that they have good reasons or good understandings for coming at their point of view and being able to get at them is very helpful in getting at these kinds of conversations, I've found.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And Ephesians 4 is a great kind of place where it talks about it kind of is trying to deal with a community that's in conflict and trying to remind them about how to be in conversation with each other, and is a great place to look at the first couple verses of Ephesians 4 where it talks about coming with a spirit of humility, of gentleness, of kind of into these conversations, remembering that we are one faith, one Lord, one baptism. And I recently heard one of the bishops talk about Bishop Jones talking about kind of difficult conversations, saying I might have 100 different opinions, and probably at least one of those I'm wrong on, but I'm not sure which one it is, right? Like if I was sure which one it is, I would change it, right? So like coming into every conversation with that sense of just humility of, I probably don't have everything figured out, and I can come in with humility and I can learn something from you. I hope maybe you can have that same kind of humility with me. And I think that's a really important place to be able to start if you're really going to have authentic dialogue. So, yeah.